All right. Well, this morning, I want to continue with what we were discussing last week on poetic analysis. We went through the setting and structure of the poem. If you remember, again, we're on the step of poetic analysis. We're going to be here a little while. This is the most critical step and the longest step in the process for studying poetry, the poetic genre. And for the poetic analysis, it really has 5 different aspects, 5 different steps to it. The first one was read and observe the poem. You want to read several times, make observations. And then secondly, after you've done that, identify the setting and the structure of the poem. And so last week, just to review what we had done, we went through this step together, just looking at the different components of this step, which was 1, identifying the background context, identifying the type of poem, and then looking at the structure of the poem. And for the background context, again, that's basically, it's the same information when we're looking at any passage of scripture. Who wrote the poem, to whom it was it written? Again, the author, recipients, can we find that information out? What do we know about the author? When was the poem written? Do we have an historical situation? What places are mentioned in the poem? The people mentioned in the poem? So these are all the different kinds of information that we look for background context. And again, remember, with the Psalms, each poem has its own background context. All right, each poem is independent of the other poems. So we would look for the background context of the poem. Now, if we were studying a poem that is within another book, then the background context would be that of the book. So if we're studying the poem in Habakkuk, chapter 3, then the background context of that psalm in chapter 3 is the book of Habakkuk. All right. So, but for the poems that are in the Psalms, those each have their own background context. And we looked at those. And by the way, for the background context, that is where the title can give us some helpful information as well. Following the background context, then the next thing that we are looking for is the type of poem, the type of psalm. And again, we focused our attention on these particular types, the praise and thanksgiving. Those would be one group of psalms, the laments, along with the imprecatory psalms, the songs of ascent, the wisdom psalms, the enthronement psalms, again, which focuses on the reign of Yahweh. The royal psalms, those are kingly psalms that could be messianic or focus on the earthly king. And the songs of Zion. Those are the songs that focus on Jerusalem and the temple. So what we want to do in the second step is just simply identify what kind of psalm do we have. And then the third step is identifying the structure of the poem. Again, poems are broken into stanzas. Each stanza represents a unit of thought, just like paragraphs in the epistles. And to identify those stanzas, we talked about a number of ways to do that within the Psalms, within a poem. We start with the Bible translation, and sometimes the Bible translations are in agreement, and that's really helpful. Sometimes they are not. So there's other tools or other things we can look at to help us, either looking for a refrain, change in speaker, change in pronouns, change in the theme or subject matter, the tone. So all of these are features that we can look for that will help us to identify the structure of the poem. And we want to find that structure because we want to identify each unit, just like we did with the epistles. We want to identify each paragraph so we can see how the author's flow of thought was moving through, in this case, through the poem. All right, so those were the different features that we looked at as far as identifying the setting and the structure of the poem. Now what I'd like to do is go through an example of this from Psalm 128. All right. It's a short psalm, just 6 verses. You can see it here on the left of your screen. I have the New American Standard Version and the English Standard Versions together here. So we have both of those versions. So what I thought we could do is since there are only 6 verses, we'll just read both versions. All right. And then I want to take some time. I want you to take some time. I'll give you a few minutes to make some observations on your own. What are things that you see in the poem? Questions you might have, insights that you might see, connections, repetitions, just again, general observations, things to look for initially. All right. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to do that on your own. But before we go to that step, let's just read both of these poems. So I'm going to ask Sir Sid, if you could read the New American Standard Version of the poem, and then Kazot, if you could read the ESV version. Sid, the New American Standard Version is on the left side here of the screen, the far left portion. Okay.
Okay, from the New American Standard Version Bible. How blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. When you shall eat of the fruit of your hands, you will be happy, and it will be well with you. Your wife shall be like a fruitful vine within your house, your children like olive plants around your table. Behold, for thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. The Lord bless you from Zion, and may you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. Indeed, may you see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel.
All right. Now, Kazot, can you read the ESV version there?
Psalm 128, a song of Ascent, verse 1. Blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. You shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands. You shall be blessed, and it shall be well with you. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. The Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. May you see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel.
Okay, great. And then actually, I also included the Legacy Standard Bible translation. I copied that. So I'm going to ask Brother Alex if you could read that. That's on the far right on their screen.
How blessed is everyone who fears Yahweh, who walks in his ways. When you shall eat of the fruit of the labor of your hands. Wait. How blessed will you be, and how well it be for you. Your wife shall be like a fruit vine in the innermost part of your house, your children like olive plants all around your table. Behold, for thus shall man be blessed who fears Yahweh. May Yahweh bless you from Zion, that you may see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. Indeed, may you see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel.
All right, very good. So what I'd like you guys to do right now is to just take a few minutes. I'm going to leave each of these translations up here for you to look at. And what I just want you to do is make some observations. Okay. of these from these passages. You can focus on one, making observations, but I'll put all three up here just so you can see them all together. Okay. All right. And then we'll come back together and discuss our observations, see what you come up with. Okay. And I'll be around, so if you have any questions, you can ask me. So let me give you a few minutes to do that. Okay. Well, let's let's talk about some things that you observed. Let's see. Michael, we'll start with you. Just maybe mention one or two observations that you made from this psalm. Anything that stuck out to you? Any questions you might have? Anything that was repeated or emphasized?
It begins with a pronouncement of blessing.
Yeah, and also give the verse numbers. So that's the verse 1, obviously.
Verse 1, yeah. And it is also repeated. Verse 2 should be blessed, and 4 blessed.
Yeah, repetition of that word, right? Bless.
Yeah.
At least in the ESV, blessed, or NAS says happy. 1, 2, 4, 5.
Yeah, 5.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, that seems to be a main theme here, right? That word bless or blessing is blessed is repeated. We even see the term prosperity, right? In verse 5, peace in verse 6. So that idea.
You will be happy in verse 2 is also a form of bless.
Yeah. Yeah, happy.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, Bririo, how about you? Anything that, any observations that you have? Make sure to unmute yourself.
Words are fears the Lord. A man who fears the Lord fears.
Yeah, man who fears, and that's repeated, right? In verse 4 also, right?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Anything else?
I think, sir, blessing who fears him.
Yeah, good. We talked about that repetition of the idea of blessing, happiness, prosperity.
Yeah.
Similar, sir, the outcome of fearing him.
I'm sorry?
An outcome of fearing him. Same idea.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, anybody else have some observations they made?
Pastor Tim, verse 6, you will have a long life because of the fear of the Lord. You will be blessed with a long life. You will see your children's children.
Okay, so verse 6.
Verse 5 and 6 are the outcome.
Okay, good. What else? What else do you guys see? Or what do you have questions about? Yeah, Alex?
I believe this was written by Moses because of verse 5. The Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem. So this seemed to be the remnants of uh, Israel, the second generation, when they were about to enter the promised land. And what else? Oh, I see. I like the ESV rendition of verse 3 and 4. There are more direct. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine in your house, and your children will be like olive shoots around your table.
Yeah, notice here
Yes.
the focus on, also notice the focus on family, right? He mentions the wife, children, and grandchildren.
Yeah,
In
it
this,
has a focus on God's work in and through the family.
yeah. Yeah, focus on God's work in the family.
And through the family.
Blessings is addressed to a certain kind of man.
Yeah, notice the psalm appears to be addressed to men, at least certainly
Those who fear
verses
the Lord.
3 and 4 addressed to men. Yeah, because it mentions wife there, and then in verse 4, man. Okay. And by the way, we wouldn't see this in the English, but the pronouns are masculine in the Hebrew.
Then the blessings, Pastor, I think is conditional.
Sorry, the blessing is conditional. Is that what you said?
Yes.
That's
Yeah. Where do you see
verse.
that?
Pastor Tim, that's his question. Is this
When
blessing
you
Oh, is
conditional?
the question. Okay, is the blessing conditional? Okay, good. Good. Anything else?
ESV verse 1, it's limited to who fears the Lord. Even though the pronoun is everyone, but it is limited to who fears the Lord. Like the death of Jesus Christ is for everyone, but beneficial for those who will receive him.
Yeah, so that does seem to sort of answer Kazot's question. That the condition of the blessing is those who fear the Lord. All right,
those
good.
who walk in his ways.
Yeah, notice verse 1, who walks in his ways. Again, knowing parallelism, right, which we'll talk about in another step, but seems to be equal to everyone who fears the Lord, right?
Pastor, there's a question. Is this blessing contradictory to what Ephesians chapter 1 verse 3 or 2? God has blessed us with every spiritual blessing.
Okay, yeah, is this blessing the same or different?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Pastor.
good. Anything else that sticks out to you? I just had myself, initially the question in verse 3, he gives these similes, like a fruitful vine, like olive shoots. What is the meaning of the similes here? Like a fruitful vine, like olive shoots.
Pastor Tim, that might be prosperity and productiveness.
Yeah, so that's something we would explore. All right, very good. Anything else? Notice, sorry, somebody else have a comment?
Pastor Tim, how does stanzas connects with each other?
Yeah. How do verses 5 and 6 connect with the rest of the poem?
The common theme of blessedness, Pastor Tim.
Well,
from verse 1 to 4, you mentioned blessing, and 5 to 6, there is also a mention of blessing.
Yeah, obviously blessing connects the poem, but in what way does verses 5 and 6 fit in that? So, yeah, obviously, blessing is a connecting thread, but verses 5 and 6 seem different. All of a sudden he talks about peace be upon Israel, and so that just what's the connection
I think
there?
verse 5 and 6, Pastor Tim, is a prayer.
Yeah, it seems like that, right? Good. Yeah, may you see the prosperity. May you see your children's children.
Pastor Tim, it seems like a benediction.
Yeah, perhaps. Good. Notice one thing that stuck out at me is the title, right? It's a song of ascents. So we know the purpose of this particular psalm, which I think might go to answering the question about whether Moses wrote it, because the Song of Ascents, those likely came later during the days of David or after that. That's when those psalms seem to be put together. Okay, any other?
And also the term Zion. The term Zion, I think it came up during the days of David.
Yeah.
When Jerusalem is often referred to as Zion also. The cause and effect theme, Pastor Tim, in this whole psalm.
Cause and effect. Where do
yes,
you see that?
the idea of blessing, the idea of the whole idea of blessing, and then the cause, its cause and effect.
Yeah, where specifically do you see that?
The main thing is, I think it's almost in every verse you see it. Okay. Okay. Psalm 128. Verse 1, the blessedness of the one who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. Verse 2, that the blessing of the labor the labors of those who fear the Lord. And in verse 3, the blessing of God in his house, his household, the wife and the children. I think this is verse 4. Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. Seems like the conclusion of this whole this part of Psalm 128, verses 1 to 4. Verse 5, again, blessing from Zion. And then the wish to see the prosperity of Jerusalem of the days of your life. And then verse 6, again, it's a blessing of long life, to see one's grandchildren, then peace for Israel. So blessing, Pastor Tim, from verse to verse 1, the whole psalm is all blessing. And that's why I said the cause and effect of blessing is here, I think, highlighted. That's my initial observation.
All right, good. Any other questions that come out from this psalm that you're wondering about? Again, we don't have to answer them here, but the idea is just to be looking at the text to identify things maybe that don't make sense or that aren't clear. Any questions?
Pastor Tim, from verse 5, about the blessing of the Lord coming from Zion. So the Lord will bless you from Zion.
Like, what does that mean?
Yes, Pastor Tim.
Okay.
Because the blessing come directly from the Lord. And why is it that it came from Zion? Or is it a quotation from Zion and you may see the prosperity? So the blessing of the Lord will start from Zion. Is that the idea, Pastor Tim?
Yeah, it seems to be that the blessing coming from Zion. So why does he mention that here instead of heaven or something like that, right?
Yes, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, why is Zion mentioned here at all? So what's the connection there? All right, good.
Is this Zion, Pastor Tim, referring to the temple in Zion?
So we'll put that down. Is Zion here a reference to the temple? Or, oh, actually, I put that question up here. Zion a reference to the temple or to Jerusalem? Here, or the Temple Mount? Okay, good. Good question. Kazo, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, same with Sir Sid, Pastor Tim. With the mention of Zion, there's also the mentioning of Jerusalem.
Yeah. Yeah. So so we would want to take note. He mentions Jerusalem in the next line. And again, understanding parallelism, then it seems like he's comparing Zion and Jerusalem, that they're the same perhaps. The Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem. So perhaps those are linked. We'll talk about that more when we look at the parallelism step. Okay, good. These are great observations, good questions. These are the kind of thing you want to look for. Spend 15 or 20 minutes and just be doing this kind of thing. Notice we came up with 3, 4, 6, 9, 12, 15, about 17 or 18 observations here. Let me do this. That'll highlight each one. So I don't know what happened there. Okay, so let's okay. So that's the first step, to read and make observations. And then the next one is identifying the setting and the structure of the poem. So let's take a few more minutes. I'm going to give you a few minutes now and just put some notes down for the background context. That is the setting of this poem. What do we see here about these, the title, the author, recipients, when it might have been written, the geography, social, the occasion, what is the purpose for it, or what prompted the writing of this particular psalm. Just take a few minutes, try to fill in that information as best you can, all right? I know we're only going to spend a few minutes doing that, but at least get started on that, and then we'll discuss it together, all right? But I want to give you a few minutes just to do that on your own. See what you can gather from the psalm itself. Okay? Okay. Let's take a look at the background context here for this particular psalm. Pastor Noor, we'll start with you. What I like to do is just first pay attention to the title, see if the title gives us any helpful information. So we do have a title in this psalm. There's a title or a superscription in 116 of the psalms, and this one has a superscript, a title. So what do we learn from the title, Pastor Noor?
I can see it is a song, is like a worship, is related to God, people talking to God or singing. Ascent, we understand that is they can sing, they might be singing that in the way going to the place of worship.
Okay, so this is a song. So that tells us this was that this is a psalm that was intended by the author to be sung. Now, notice it's described as a song of ascent, right? And what does that tell us about this psalm?
It's going up, Pastor Tim.
Going up.
Going uphill or mountain.
Okay, so going up into the sky. No, sorry. Okay, going up.
To the place of worship.
Yeah, going up the mountain to the Temple Mount for worship, and it was this at a specific time in the year.
It's about the feast.
Yes.
Celebration of a feast.
It's intended to be sung by the they call them the pilgrims coming to Jerusalem for one of the 3 annual feasts.
3 yearly feasts: Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles.
Yeah, good. Passover, Pentecost, or booths. In fact, let me see. Another song of ascents, Psalm 122, Yeah, it has this, let us go to the house of the Lord. So that gives that idea. These songs of ascents are being sung by those going to Jerusalem, particularly the Temple Mount, during one of these three annual feasts. Okay, so that actually gives us the purpose of the psalm, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This tells us the purpose of the psalm, or at least I guess we could say the occasion, right? That it was to be sung during the feast. That's why the author wrote it. Again, there's let's see, Psalm 120 to 134. So there's 15 of these songs of ascent. And by the way, we know that the people traveled in groups. How do we know that?
They travel in groups, Pastor, because to protect themselves from highway robberies. They call that caravan.
Yeah. Do we have any examples of that?
During the nativity, when the wise men visit the baby or the child born at Bethlehem.
Okay. But that wasn't during an annual feast, but it was a time of travel. Are there any examples of people traveling in groups during one of the feasts?
Let us go to the house of the Lord.
Okay, yeah. Psalm 122 describes that. Any other examples?
From the New Testament, Pastor Tim?
Yes.
The healing of the blind man when Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem to worship at the temple during the feast.
Yeah, there was
people
Bartimaeus. Okay.
Chapter 5.
In a group.
John chapter 5.
John 5.
It says it's during a feast in Jerusalem. John 5 verse 1.
Yeah, that wasn't when he healed the blind man though, right? That was just describing the feast.
The one in the John 5 is the healing of the paralytic.
Yeah.
The take up your bed.
Yeah, that just tells us there were a lot of people in Jerusalem during the feast. What my question is are there any examples about people traveling in caravans for one of these feasts? There is an example, at least one that I know of. Not coming to mind? Do you remember when Jesus was 12 years old?
Yeah.
Yes, when Jesus was lost in the temple.
That's Luke chapter.
He was lost for 3 days.
Yeah, Luke chapter 2, right? And his parents lost him. How could they lose him if they were just traveling, just a family? Right? So they must have been in a large group. And so they assumed, that Jesus was with,
it was Feast of the Passover.
Yeah, that he was, with one of the, is it Uncle Tata? Is that the right? Tito. He's with his Tito or something, right? They thought, he's with
the relatives.
Yeah, with the Lolo or cousin or something. So, so they didn't notice he was missing for a couple of days. So that clearly, I think, shows us they were traveling in a group, probably a large group, for them not to notice him missing for a couple of days. Anyway, just that's just a side note or side point, but there are just things like that, little things to keep in mind, because that helps us to understand the background situation. So here we have this Song of Ascents that was meant to be sung during one of the 3 annual feasts, and it would be sung by a large group of people as they were coming to Jerusalem, especially as they were ascending into Jerusalem. Remember, the Temple Mount is the highest point, the highest elevation in Jerusalem. And if you were coming from the eastern side from Jericho, you would be going up a very steep hill. Okay, if we look at a map here of Israel, let me see if I can pull one up. Okay, let's see what we come up with here. See if anything's helpful. Maybe we could do this for fun. Anything here that could be useful? Maybe here, this one. Okay. You guys see this map okay?
Yes.
Okay. Now, of course, Jerusalem is here, as you can see, Bethlehem. Now, Jericho here is on the other side, is in the valley. So going from Jerusalem to Jericho, you actually go down a steep mountain, and the Dead Sea is actually the lowest elevation on the earth. And so I think it's 1,200 meters below sea level, or I can't remember. You can look it up. But basically, to go from Jericho, so if people were traveling from the north here and coming through Jericho, they would be, and here's the Jordan River, by the way, they would have to go up a very long hill, a steep hill, to go into Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is at the highest elevation in that area. That's why they would say going up, Song of Ascent, because if you're going to the Temple Mount, that would be the highest point in the city. So to get there, you have to go up in elevation. All right, so that's why it was called an ascent, or a song of ascents. And again, they were grouped together, 15 psalms that were meant to be sung during the annual feast. And so these psalms focus on family, focus especially on Jerusalem, focus on the temple. You'll see that in the themes of these particular psalms. But we know whenever you see Song of Ascents, we know, that tells us the purpose of the psalm was to be sung at this period of, at this specific time of celebration during the feast. And so when you're studying these psalms, look for connections to the celebration of those feasts. Okay? Now, it wasn't, these songs were to be sung for any of the 3 feasts, not just one particular feast, but you will see connections or links within the Psalms to those feasts. And so remember that as you're interpreting these particular Psalms, that in fact, I think there's one Psalm that I assigned from this group. As you're interpreting these Psalms, keep that in your mind. Okay, the psalmist wrote this with the intent that it be sung during the feast. Therefore, it has some connection to those feasts, to those times of celebration, to those times where everyone would be gathering together to worship the Lord, either at Pentecost, Passover, or the Feast of Booths. All right, so knowing just that simple title actually tells us some helpful information about the intent of the psalm. Okay, and by the way, again, these titles were inspired, written by the author, and so they tell us the author's intent right away. Why did he write this psalm? What was its purpose? Well, it's a song of ascents, so we know exactly what he wrote this psalm for. All right, any questions on that?
None so far.
Okay. Good. So we get some helpful insights from the title there. Now let's keep going and look at some of the other information then for the background context and see if we can figure it out. Pastor Noor, we'll stay with you on this. Can we figure out, do we know who the author and who the recipients are for this particular psalm? Are we given that information?
We do not have the information about the author, but the recipients, we can understand they are the group going to worship, the people who almost whoever can hear the song.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah, we know the author. In fact, let me just separate this. That will make it easier. The author is unknown, okay? We don't learn who wrote this. We don't know who wrote it. Someone had a question, maybe Moses did. We don't know. We're not given the explicit person who wrote it. However, the recipients, we know it's intended for the people of Israel, especially those who were coming to worship at the temple during the 3 annual feasts. All right, so we know that that's the initial audience. Obviously, there's a extended audience in us later in time, but we know the primary initial group, the original audience, is the Jewish pilgrims going to Jerusalem during the feast. Now, anybody have, thank you, Nora, anybody have an idea when perhaps this psalm was written?
Pastor Tim, post-exilic, after the exile.
Okay, how do we know that?
It is more than 100, nearing to the end, 150. So my estimate is it is after the exile.
Well, keep in mind
539 BCE.
539. Do you see that in the Psalm? Where does it say that?
Yeah, in Wikipedia.
Wikipedia. No.
You're cheating.
No.
This exilic period.
Okay, we will look up that information later. For now, we must do this. Okay. Now
strike out.
Now this psalm is later in the Psalter, but keep in mind the order of the psalms is not necessarily chronological. Psalm 90, which was written by Moses, is believed to be the first psalm, and that's at Psalm 90. It wasn't put at Psalm 1 or even near Psalm 1. However, these psalms are part of the, was it book 4? I can't remember. They are one of the later books, and so likely were compiled later, but we don't know for sure when this one was written. The earliest known, the earliest known songs of ascent, were written by David. Okay, there's some that were written by David. These are the ones we know about. Okay, Psalm 122, 124, 131, 133. Those are known to be from David, okay? We don't know Psalm 128 for sure because we don't know who wrote it. The latest known psalm, is Psalm 126, which is post-exilic because it does mention being freed, come out of slavery, come out of captivity. Now, Psalm 128 could be in the time of David. It could be post-exilic. We we don't know for sure because we are not given much information in the Psalm that will tell us. So it's hard to pinpoint when this is. But I wouldn't say because it's later in the Psalms that we know it's later, written later. As I said earlier, there are some songs of ascents that are written by David. Okay, that wouldn't be something necessarily the case. It's possible that this is post-exilic, but it's also possible it could have written by in the time of David. And there's
certain.
Yeah, Noor.
Psalm 127 is related to Psalm 128. Any commentaries do you mention that?
Well, that's a good question. By the way, we'd put that in our observations, right? Is Psalm 127 related to or connected to Psalm 128? Now, what would cause that question? What do we see as a possible connection between those two?
About
Psalms?
family. We talk about the family.
Yeah, both relate to family. Right? We see in Psalm 127, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one youth. All right. So we see that in both Psalms, the reference to children. Anything else that connects these two Psalms or seems to?
The Psalm 128 is a challenge of the one who fear the Lord will have all this. Psalm 127, unless the Lord will do that, nothing will happen also.
Yeah, both rely or describe reliance on the Lord for blessing. And notice both have the phrase blessed is the man. Okay, Psalm 127, you see that here? Blessed is the man. So there are some connections.
Pastor Tim.
Yeah.
127 and 128 can also be connected with eating.
With eating.
They ate the bread of anxious toil. And the other one is eat happily.
Yeah. Okay, so there are some connections there. Now notice Psalm 127, Solomon was the author. So that one, there is that distinction. Psalm 127 mentions the author. Psalm 128 does not.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think they are put next to each other because the person who compiled the Psalms, likely in this case, maybe Ezra could have done this or someone around his time. We don't know for sure, but perhaps because of the similarities between these two Psalms, I think the compiler just stuck them together. I don't think that they were necessarily written by the same author with the same focus or themes. There are definitely some connections. That's clear. And I think that's just because someone else later, when he was putting the Psalms together, noticed, oh, these two Psalms are very similar. Then they put them next to each other. We see many examples of that. I think Psalm 111? Praise the Lord, 112. Okay, so notice here, Psalm 111 starts with praise the Lord. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart. Psalm 112, praise the Lord. Oh, blessed is the man who fears the Lord. We've seen that. Psalm 113, praise the Lord. Praise those servants of the Lord. So notice here that those three Psalms are put together in order, I think, because they begin in the same way. So we do see evidence in the Psalms. I think Psalm 9 and 10 is another example, if I remember right. Let me see, Psalm 9. Oh, maybe not. There are several, though, if you look in the Psalms, where there's 2 or 3 Psalms that are grouped together, most likely because the compiler saw connections, similarities. not necessarily because they were written by the same author and meant to be put together. But yeah, commentators will comment on the connections or similarities between Psalm 127 and Psalm 128. And certainly we do see some similar themes or comments in these Psalms. I think because they both focus on the family, that the compiler put them next to each other.
Oh.
But that's a great question. So we would put that in, we'd want to put that in our observation step, because that's a really good observation. I'll put it up here. Okay. So when it's written, we don't really have a lot of clear insight on that because we don't know the author. We do know the occasion. It's a song of ascents, but again, there were songs of ascents written by David, written by Solomon, and even written after the exile. So there's quite a wide range of time between the songs of ascents that were written. And then, of course, later collected together, grouped together. All right. So that's all we can really glean there. Geography, that is, are there any places mentioned here in the Psalm that we would need to give further study to?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem,
Zion.
certainly, right? So let's put this down here. Verse 5, Jerusalem. Obviously, very popular place in the Old Testament. Any other places mentioned?
Zion.
Zion, yeah, good. Again, our question earlier was, is this Jerusalem or the Temple Mount or the temple? Okay, that.
13. This is related to this question is related to geography at the same time in our observation. What is the writer of, what do you call this, chapter this 128 with regard to Israel, is he referring to a place, Israel, or people from Israel?
Yeah, that's a good question. Peace be upon Israel. That was a common expression and prayer, actually, of the Jews that God would bring. And typically it's a reference to the nation. I mean, obviously, it's not necessarily just the land, but obviously the people who dwell in the land, right? We would assume are a part of that. But that word peace there, I think, if I remember right, should be shalom. Yeah, shalom. Shalom al Israel. So peace, really, it's just shalom is more the idea of blessing, prosperity, security, peace. It's this overall concept of wholeness, bliss, happiness, protection. It's kind of a pretty large word. Really, Psalm 23, I think, captures the idea of, Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, puts me beside quiet waters. That's the idea of peace, not just peace from war, but also prosperity and comfort, security, blessing, those kinds of things. So anyway, Israel is mentioned there. Jerusalem, Zion, all by the way in verses 5 and 6. Any other places mentioned?
Home, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, we could say
for the family.
The house, right? It's not a city, but it is a location, right? The house is described. And then, of course, the table within the house as well. Okay, good. So those are things we want to keep in mind as we look at and further study. Social context, that simply just means who are the people mentioned in this particular psalm?
Family.
Yeah, family, right? Wife,
Man,
Children's
wife,
children.
man, wife, children, grandchildren.
yeah, and then verse 6, grandchildren.
And I also I can see that the nation is a result included there.
Yeah, maybe the people of Israel
Yeah.
are applied there.
Yeah.
There's no
Jerusalem.
specific names, like we aren't given the specific names of anybody, just general descriptions. The man, right, who fears the Lord. Okay. So no specific names, like he doesn't mention, Moses or Jacob or, David or anything like that, but we do have these general categories of people. Progeny, there you go. It's a fancy word. Okay, so cultural. Now, cultural is there anything here in this passage that would have some cultural connections or be important to understand in regards to the culture?
Religious celebration of feast.
Yeah, the title, right? Ascent. So we'd want to understand we need to understand the annual feasts. What were they? What were they? Why were they celebrated? What is their significance? Okay, so you'd want to do a little study on those particular feasts. All right, again, the feast of Passover, booths, and Pentecost in particular. All right, so if you're going to understand the background context of this psalm, you really have to have some understanding of those particular feasts. Okay. Anything else culturally that would be important here?
The simile use, Pastor, fruitful, the olive plants.
Yeah, what is the significance of the fruitful vine and the olive shoots? That is, what would these mean to the original audience? How would they understand that? Okay, it could be a cultural thing, right? We don't talk about olive shoots in our home around our table here in the States. But so what significance would that have for the original audience, the people of Israel? Okay, again, we don't want to import our idea of what we think that would mean. What we would have to do is understand and study what would that culture understand. So we would need to look those things up elsewhere in the Old Testament. Are there any other passages that talk about a vine, a fruitful vine, especially in connection to a woman? Are there any other places that talk about olive shoots? What would an olive tree? What is the significance or importance of an olive tree in that culture? All right. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Don't assume that you know. Would an olive tree be a good thing or not? We would think a good thing given the theme of this psalm and blessing, but how? If it is a good thing, how is it a good thing? What would that convey or communicate in that culture? Okay, that's the idea, a thing that you'd have to study and look for as you study this particular psalm. All right, and the background context. Now, the occasion, we've already discussed that. This is a song, right? This is a song of ascent. So we have the occasion, which we already talked about earlier, in the title. Okay? So this would be the kind of information you would be looking for. Now, given our time here, we'll have to, let's just go through the psalm type. All right, what kind of psalm is this, guys? Is it a lament?
Hallel.
Hymn. It's
It's
a
a
hymn.
Hallel.
It's specific. Well, Hallel psalms were Hallel was the Psalms
Hallelujah.
113 to 118. And those were identified later that were sung at the feast. This psalm type, again, it's a song of ascent. That's a particular category, but also we could classify this as a wisdom psalm, right? It gives us instruction. So, for example, we have here, you know, he's talking about how blessed is the man who fears the Lord. So this is, whenever you have how blessed is the man or the person or everyone, that's usually going to be connected to, probably as part of a wisdom psalm. Another example of this is Psalm 1, right? Talks about the one who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked and the righteous. So this is like really a wisdom psalm. It's giving instruction. It is a song of ascent primarily, but it also has characteristics of a wisdom psalm giving instruction. And then finally, as we consider the stanzas, all right, again, the first thing we want to do is we look at the different translations. So if we look at the New American Standard here on the left, and again, remember, they show the stanzas by putting a space to separate them. What are the stanzas given by the New American Standard?
2 stanzas for the New American Standard.
Yeah, what are the verses?
Verses 1 to 4, and verses 5 and 6.
Okay, how about the ESV?
Verse 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, so they have 3 stanzas. We looked at the LSB earlier here, up here.
LSB has 2
stanzas.
It is similar with NASB.
Yes. Okay, so we'll note that here. The LSB had 2 stanzas. And then if we look at, let's see here, how about let's look at the New King James. That's a little different. What do you see here?
4 stanzas. They broke down the 6.
Verse
they
1.
Broke down the 6th verse into 2.
Yeah, they split it up quite a bit. Now the NIV has here how many stanzas? 2. So that seems to be, notice we've got 1, 2, 3 translations with the same, verses 1 to 4, verses 5 to 6. Okay, so that would tend to say, okay, well, maybe that's a likely possibility. Now, as we look at the psalm, is there anything else? Remember all those other refrain, a salah, change in grammar, change in pronouns, change in speaker. Is there anything else here in this psalm, any other clues that would guide or direct us to what the stanzas might be, what the structure might be?
Family and city. It is
okay, yeah, there seems to be perhaps a change in themes. Verses 1 to 4 focus on the family. Verses 5 and 6 on the future and on the city. All right, so that's a possibility. Anything else that might indicate structure?
We can add, Pastor Tim, that it starts with the individual or individuals, and then families, and then the city or the whole nation. The
Okay,
progression
so
of the
1 to
blessing.
4 is on individual and his family. So it's kind of similar to what Michael was mentioning. Verses 5 to 6, then on a larger group, the city and the nation. All right. Anything else? Somebody made a great observation. I forgot who it was earlier. Maybe it was Kazot. I can't remember. But someone made the comment about the nature of verses 5 and 6 compared to the verses 1 to 4.
Yes, Pastor. How it connects.
Yeah. What did you say there? You remember? Verses 5 to 6.
The first 4 verses is the starting of he begins with pronouncement of blessings. Then in the 5 to 6, I think he ends with a prayer.
Yeah. Yeah, do you guys see that? May the Lord bless you. May you see. May you live. Verses 5 and 6, really, the idea is prayer. He's making a request. Verses 1 to 4, he's making a statement. You see that? So verses 1 to 4, I would say, is more of a direct statement. Notice it's the indicative. The verbs are indicative. They're making a statement. Whereas verses 5 to 6 is a prayer. And it's called Jussiv in Hebrew. Whenever you have a sort of a request, it's written as an imperative, but it's this idea of may the Lord, may you do this. We're requesting. So that's sort of a distinction there. And one other thing, probably the biggest thing, is notice there seems to be an inclusio here in this psalm. You guys see it?
Verse 1 and verse 4.
Yeah. Blessed are all who fear the Lord. This will be the blessing for the man who fears the Lord. Or the NAS is a little better. Thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. How blessed is everyone who fears the Lord. See that? It's not exact same words, but they're very close. And again, that would make sense, right? Because within verses 1 to 4, the focus is on his family and on the man, his labor and his family. Verses 5 and 6 are a more general prayer for the city and for the nation. So I think all of these factors would point us to the most likely structure of this is verses 1 to 4. It's 2 stanzas, and then verses 5 to 6. Okay? All right, any questions on that? Further comments? Does that make sense? I mean, this is the kind of process you would go through to try to identify structure of the psalm. But
Certain?
Yeah.
Yeah, verse 5, he said, may the Lord bless you from Zion. The word from is indicate that you already, when they go to worship, they have that blessing of the Lord.
Yeah, it's the request, really, right? Again, it's in the form of a prayer or a benediction, I think somebody said. May the Lord bless you from Zion. That makes sense. If this is a song of ascent, as they are going toward Jerusalem, particularly the Temple Mount, that this prayer for blessing from Zion as they approach Zion. And again, the focus of these particular psalms is these feasts of celebration for the people of Israel. And so it makes sense there. You know, one of the prayers as well is, may we see the prosperity of Jerusalem. And then peace be upon Israel. Okay, so that's the second part here of poetic analysis is first we read and observe the poem, and then secondly, we identify the structure and the setting. Now, you identify the structure at the beginning. Later on, as you study the psalm more, you may realize, I think the structure is a little different than what I first thought. So as we get more familiar with the psalm, we may see other things that would change our mind a little bit about the structure. So the point here is just try to identify the structure at this point in the psalm, at this point in your study, and just know that, we could change it later. As you, just like your block diagram, you do an initial diagram, and then later on you think, I actually, now that I know more about this passage, I would change it a little bit. Well, it's the same here. You're not locked into this structure for the rest of your study. This is just, you're trying to get an initial understanding of the structure, knowing that that's possible. It could change as you get more familiar with the poem. Okay, but from what we see so far, all the information supports 2 stanzas in this psalm. Okay. All right. Any final comments or questions? That makes sense? I hope going through that example was helpful. All right. Keep reading this particular psalm. We'll use it as our example in the future steps. Next week when we gather, we'll look at the parallelism. So it would be good for you to review your notes on parallelism, because we're going to go through that and do it for this particular psalm. And then go to the imagery and poetic devices again, which we discussed in an earlier session. So we'll be doing those steps next for Psalm 128. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks guys for your attention tonight. Let me ask Brother Sid if you could close our time in prayer.
Okay, let us pray.